Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. Our guest today served as an ambassador to South Africa in the Clinton administration. He was president of NPR, he worked for the Peace Corps, and he had a long career in public affairs. He's lived in the Las Cruces area for many years and now serves as visiting senior fellow for global affairs at New Mexico State University. We welcome a good friend, Ambassador Delano Lewis. Delano, thank you for being here. I want to begin with the new role here at NMSU.
Well, thank you, Fred. It's always good to be with you and to be with you on the Newsmakers program. Yes, I am very excited. Over a year ago, I was on a consulting contract with the then new provost of NMSU, Carol Parker. And after the contract ended, she made some suggestions that maybe I could continue with a faculty appointment. So I was appointed visiting senior fellow for global affairs. And the same idea was to begin to explore international initiatives on the campus, begin to reorganize it, bring it into some kind of focus, and give the provost and the school some advice about international activities. So that's what I've been doing for the past few months now. I'm very excited about it.
We're glad that you're here doing that and hope to be working with you on some projects. The pandemic has been another reminder of the importance of global relations. Give me a sense of your view as to why students need to have international experiences.
Yes, I've been very high on this for some time because of my experiences that once you get a chance to see that there are other ways of doing things, get a view of how America is viewed around the world, get a sense of other cultures, religions, languages, geography, it really broadens your view of life. You begin to know that all Americans aren't liked. We don't have all of the answers. We can learn from other countries. In other words, the pandemic has shown us how connected we are. We are really in a global society. And so part of your education should be involving an understanding of nations outside this country, as well as understanding your own country, but becoming a global citizen. I think that's so important.
It is, and boy, I can tell, your personal experience is so rich. You have this long history of international experience much earlier in your career, long before being named U.S. Ambassador to South Africa in the Clinton administration. You worked for the Peace Corps. Tell me about that.
Yes, I was very, very fortunate. I started my government service when Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General, and I was in the Justice Department as a lawyer. And within about 2 years later, from 1963-65, I joined the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So I was on a path to be in government, hopefully dealing with civil rights. But I had this opportunity to go to the Peace Corps as Peace Corps staff. Now, it was a little bit beyond out of my comfort zone because I really was interested in domestic activities and particularly civil rights. But this was an opportunity to explore the world and to become an administrator. And my family could go. We had our housing provided, a salary. I was Peace Corps staff. And my first assignment was Associate Director of the Peace Corps in Benin City, Nigeria. Now, we went there with my wife, Gail, and 3 small boys. And they were 5, 3, and 2. And what an experience they had, and we all had, for over a year and a half in Nigeria. And we had to leave because of the Civil War was building up and it was not secure. So we evacuated all the Peace Corps out. And shortly thereafter, I was named Peace Corps Director for the Peace Corps in Uganda. So I went from Western Nigeria, Western Africa, Nigeria, to East Africa, Uganda, from being an assistant director to becoming the country director, running the Peace Corps program of over 160 teaching volunteers. So Not only did I get a chance to visit and experience another part of the world, but also had a chance to be an administrator and run a program at a very, very young age. A very exciting opportunity.
Yeah, and fortunate that it's a program that still it gives rich experiences today to so many young people. Of course, when those young people go overseas, they often find out that our view in the world has suffered over the last few years. Give me a sense, in your view, of how President Joe Biden can repair some of the damage.
Yes, it's a big challenge. And let me give a personal note about the Peace Corps. It's still going on after over 50 some years. They had to evacuate because of the pandemic, but I was excited to have a granddaughter who had graduated from the University of Florida, had her master's in education, and she became a Peace Corps volunteer in Indonesia. And so proud of her. And she had to leave after a year and a half because of the pandemic. So it's still going on, service by our young people to places across the globe. Yes, President Biden has a real challenge to repair lots of things that have happened over the past 5 years as it relates to international relations. One, on climate change. Since he's taken over, he's rejoined the Paris Accord on climate change. He's working with our allies to repair. America First is important, but we really need to know and to support our allies, and that had been lacking over the last few years. And secondly, renegotiating the Iran treaty, nuclear proliferation treaty, beginning to work with our allies on not only the pandemic, but other issues that we all share in common. So yes, there's work to be done. There's work, he has a new Secretary of State, Andrew Blinken, a new team with Vice President Kamala Harris. They're all together, not only working on domestic issues, but very concerned about our relations overseas.
Well, the Biden administration, as you know, as well as local and state officials, have another major challenge: our need for policing reform and racial justice. Tell me your thoughts, Delano, about the Black Lives Matter movement over the last year and the eventual conviction of Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd. Since we last talked about this, as you know, there are also now going to be federal charges that are going to be prosecuted against Derek Chauvin.
And the other 3 police officers as well. Yes, this didn't begin with Black Lives Matter, and it didn't begin with George Floyd. Black Lives Matter over time had been an advocacy group, but had been sort of politicized and labeled as a group that didn't care but about other lives, but only Black lives. But I think it was clear from the beginning, and certainly clear after the George Floyd murder, that they were saying that all lives mattered, but particularly Black lives. Now, George Floyd captured our attention in this country and around the world because the courageous video that was taken at the time of his murder. And the world got to see that 9 minutes and 29 seconds with the police officer Derek Chauvin's knee on the neck of George Floyd. And that caught the attention of the world, which saying these things are real. You couldn't deny it. But Fred, this goes back to our vestiges of slavery in our country. The fact that that tragic part of our history where we treated persons of color, particularly Africans from Africa, that were enslaved and treated as property and cattle to be bought and sold. And along with that came vestiges of ideas that Black was inferior and whites were superior. Those kinds of attitudes just emanated from our vestige of slavery, and we just never really confronted it. We never over time talked about it in schools, had dialogue about it. And in my time in South Africa, I covered a lot of issues in South Africa as the U.S. ambassador, but I was most impressed with Archbishop Desmond Tutu and its Reconciliation and Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And this was an effort to talk about apartheid, which similarly was a segregated system. In this case, it was a minority white embodying and controlling a majority Black population. But it was still very awful and horrible and tragic. But they talked about it and they brought it out in the open. They discussed it. They would bring in people who perpetrated those things and asked for forgiveness and had discussions about it. And I think that openness helps us heal and help us come together. So we need to do that. We need to think about it. But in this country, we have sort of politicized it, and that's unfortunate. When we talk about police reform, we really need to be talking about police-community relations, being able to count on the police to protect us, not to be afraid of the police if I'm a Black or brown man or woman. So we've got a lot to do with police reform. And it's not about defunding police. It's not about getting rid of police. It's about improving police and community relations, redefining what it means in our society, working together and having relationships with all people and understanding that we're all human. And I think that's what we have to do going forward.
So important, and just touching the surface there, but you sum up the fact that this goes far beyond what happens in a courtroom. It's what happens in our communities, what happens in the city council and in our schools. There is so much work to do, and certainly something that we need to continue to talk about. President Biden, as you know, faces so many other challenges in addition to this one. But even some of his critics have been impressed with the quick rollout of COVID vaccines. President Ronald Reagan long ago said that government was the problem, not the solution. President Biden, though, is reminding some people that the government is essential in a crisis. I wanted you to talk about that a bit. You spent most of your working career in Washington, D.C., thinking, I'm sure, about the federal government and local politics there in Washington, D.C. Quite a bit.
I sure did, Fred. You and I have had these conversations before, and I was very fortunate. I served in the Justice Department, as I mentioned, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the U.S. Peace Corps, not only in Nigeria and Uganda, but I was a part of the U.S. Peace Corps back in Washington. I worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Edward Brooke, senator from Massachusetts. At that time, he was the only Black senator in the U.S. Senate. And then I worked for Congressman Walter Fauntroy, who was the non-voting delegate to the House of Representatives, and I was his chief of staff. So I've had years of government service. But your question about government's role is a political question that's been talked about for years. We fought a civil war because of state versus national government. Who has control? We've gone through a pandemic where governors exercised control and the federal government was not taking a leadership role. I think we need to take it out of the politics. We need to take it out of the labels about should we have a national government or the government's the problem. It's not the solution. It's the problem. I think we talk about leadership and governance, that we need to work together for the benefit of our communities and societies. And governors have roles, and the federal government has a role. They have a real role on bringing things together in an organized fashion, because the leadership of the presidency can speak on a national level. And that's what Biden has done as it relates to the pandemic. They came in as number one effort. We're going to get control of this pandemic, and we're going to get vaccinations into the arms of Americans. And they set out to do that. And now we've seen the change. And I must also give kudos to our own state and our governor, although there have been some critics about our governor's work here, Michelle Lujan Grisham, because she took an active role as a state government in helping us get through this pandemic. And we were on the top level of controlling this virus as a state. And I think congratulations are in order. And as now many of us are vaccinated in this state and around the country, and we're beginning to see some daylight. We began to listen to the scientists. We began to take a leadership role and coordinate it. And that came from the federal government and working with our states. That was very crucial.
Absolutely. Still, of course, President Biden has many challenges ahead with a slim majority in Congress. How, in your view, can Democrats move past this to get things like infrastructure and some of his other priorities passed into law?
Well, I'm a government watcher and a real political junkie, and I find all of this fascinating. And I think we have the right person as our president and the right person as our vice president, particularly from Biden's point of view. He's got the experience. He has spent years in the U.S. Senate. He spent 4 years as our vice president. He knows his way around. I can't remember any other time, I guess I could say from the time of Lyndon Baines Johnson. President Johnson was also a power in the Senate. He knew how those things work, and he developed a great society. And I think Biden is on the cusp of going in that same direction, taking leadership of the federal government, working together and moving things forward because he knows the Senate. And to answer your question, how is he going to get things done? I think he wants to talk across the aisle. He wants to get Republicans and independents moving in the same direction. But it appears that that's going to be difficult and a challenge. If he does reconciliation, which means this is a budget procedure, if they can do that and pushing legislation, that takes about 50 votes. And they have those votes. And if there's a tie, the Democrats through Kamala Harris could break the tie. But if filibuster comes through when legislation is being talked about, it takes 60 votes to override the filibuster. Now, is that going to be a part of the legislative activity? I don't know. Are they going to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate? I don't know. But I do know there's a guy who's the president of the United States named Joe Biden who understands the Senate, and also Kamala Harris, who had been a senator from California. I think our president and vice president can figure that out. And my judgment will be there will be some others from across the aisle. Ultimately, they're going across to move things forward for the good of America. Infrastructure is clear. You mentioned that. Roads, bridges, affordable housing, all those things, jobs. And he is putting infrastructure and jobs together. I think that's a bright move as well. So I'm confident that he's got the skills to move it forward. And I think there'll be others coming around, and both parties, I think, hopefully will work together. I'm somewhat optimistic.
We'll be watching. Maybe in a year we'll have a report card and see how it all went. Well, Delano, while political challenges remain, many Republicans, including former President Donald Trump, are still focused on the November elections. What is your assessment of the danger of the continued efforts to make false allegations of fraud regarding the election?
Well, I think this is a political strategy. It's gone beyond just talking about voter fraud. I think it's a political strategy on the part of the Republican Party, of some in the Republican Party. So I think there's a fracture in the party, and the leadership at this point, some of the leadership is following former President Donald Trump, and that is a strategy that the election was stolen and there was voter fraud, and they're using this as a strategy, and they're using it with controlled Republican-controlled state legislatures, and they're passing these laws which are putting barriers to voting. It's a sort of a double message, a message that, oh no, we're out to correct things, we're out to curb fraud, but in many ways they're out to curb activities and to suppress voters. And I think that's the wrong direction. So I think it's a voting strategy, it's a political strategy on the part of Republicans, at least some Republican Party, and they're not so sure it's going to hold. We'll have to wait and see. Will all Republicans move in that direction? Liz Cheney, who has a number 3rd position in the Republican Party, there's a movement to maybe move her out because she's saying we need to be working together, that it's been gone through the courts. The courts have exhausted and said there was no fraud in this election. All that has been exhausted, but they're still moving forward. And I think that's a political strategy. And the question remains, will the Republicans continue to support this as a party? We will have to wait and see. I have a feeling that strategy is going to wear thin. I think our American voters are going to see that we need to be about allowing people to vote in this democracy, given this opportunity to exercise this right and to exercise it safely. And if that means mail-in votes, we can do that securely, which is the last election shows. I think the American people is going to see through this as a voting strategy, as a political strategy, and I'm not so sure it's going to work. So we'll see.
Okay. Of course, this rhetoric, critics argue, particularly from former President Trump, led to tragedy. Washington, D.C. was your home for many years. Tell me your reaction on January 6th during the attack on the Capitol.
Fred, it was just horrifying. I had gotten alert that there had been an attack on the Capitol, and I turned on the television, and my wife, Gail, and I watched it for the rest of the day. It was absolutely horrifying. I'd worked on the House side, worked on the Senate side at first with Senator Edward Brooke. I remember going from the Senate office building and through the tunnels up into the main Senate chamber. I worked on the House side, and I know my way around Capitol Hill. For some 20 plus years, I lived in Washington. But it was horrifying to see the attack on our democracy, an attack on the US Capitol, when you could see not only the breaking of the windows and the doors and pushing through, and to see Confederate flags inside the Capitol. We fought a civil war in the South. The Confederacy lost that war, and we were supposedly a United States. But to see those persons who are saying they're there for justice and to trying to correct an election that was stolen, and they were not peaceably exercising their rights, but forcibly. And I must say, Fred, I was very worried. I'm not really a conspiratorial thinker, but I was very concerned about their ease in which they were allowed to get through those barricades. And there's some investigation going on now as to whether there might have been some collusion between some in the Capitol Police and some of those who chose to attack during that day. But it was very unfortunate for us. It was seen around the world. This cradle of democracy, this great experiment, the United States of America, was under siege. It was horrifying. And the lives of those members, it was horrifying. They were talking about hanging our vice president, hanging him, and he had to be swift off to safety. It was very sad and very tragic.
Yeah, and I guess, so many people are having a hard time now, considering all that's happened, seeing this continue, that these allegations of fraud, what led to this, many argue, are continuing. And also there's a continuing many politicians continuing to court President Trump.
Yes, I don't mean to make this a partisan discussion at all. And I know you're trying to get to the truth, which all of us would like to see. But it's just sort of baffles the mind that after that insurrection on January 6th, people are still talking about that. And it was horrifying because those representatives were fleeing for their lives. And many of them are now saying, oh, that wasn't quite so bad, or that really wasn't this or wasn't that. It was absolutely horrible. And they're still continuing to say that the election was stolen. Our former president, Donald Trump, has not admitted that he lost the election. And many of his party members are holding on to the fact that it is stolen. That's kind of hard to fathom.
Yeah.
They've taken all this through the courts, and the courts have said there was no voter fraud, but yet it's still being talked about. And as I said before, I think it's a political strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another thing that we'll probably continue to follow up on in the months ahead, we just have a few minutes left, believe it or not, Delano, and these difficult times show the need for in-depth news coverage. You also spent 5 years in your career as president of NPR. Tell me your thoughts about its growing importance, not only on the radio, but also online.
Yeah, it was a very, very exciting time for me. And I was very honored to be president of National Public Radio, a real challenge. There were only about, I think, 600 or 700 stations like KRWG around the world, a staff of about 400 people, but very talented journalists. And I was there to try to help them manage, but many of them, didn't want to be managed. So it was an administrative challenge, but one in which I thoroughly enjoyed. But one of the things I was trying to do in my early days, I was there from 94 to 98 or so. And one of the things I was trying to do was to grow our audience, because I really felt that our NPR listener was 50 years plus, and that we need to grow our audience to maybe younger listeners. And I thought maybe uses of technology would help us do it. And at that time, I had come from telecommunications after spending 21 years in telecom. And so I was trying to bring in some technology to the organization, but people were kind of dragging their feet and not wanting to do it. I remember trying to do a model with hearing Bob Edwards' voice on the computer at NPR, and it was hearing Morning Edition through the internet. And now when I listen, people were saying, "Oh, we shouldn't be doing this." And now when I listen at KRWG, we're saying, "Listen, you can hear this on krwg.org, and you can hear it online." So I was there in the very beginning and moving NPR forward. But to answer your question, it has always been a very professional institution with in-depth journalism and balanced news. And also, this is the best place for international news. And I used to have, if we have a minute, my taxi cab story. I'd get in the taxi cab in Washington, and they would ask, their NPR would be on the radio, and I asked them why they're listening. And they said it's the best source of international news. And most taxi cab drivers probably were from other parts of the world, and they got their news internationally from NPR. So it's 50 years old and still going strong.
Yeah, great year to talk about it. 50th birthday in 2021, and you were part of that history as president for 5 years. So an honor to talk with you about that. That's how you and I met 13 years ago when you were also serving as an advisor to the reorganization of what became KRWG Public Media. And you've been a good friend to the station and to me, and I appreciate you. I think it's a record, Delano. You've been on the show 3 times. I don't think I've had another guest on 3 times before.
People are going to get tired of this, Fred. But I'm
No.
always honored, and I'm honored to be your friend, and honored to be a friend of KRWG. Yes, we put TV and radio together when Dr. Martin was the president of NMSU, and I was pleased to help advise on putting public media together here in Las Cruces. And it's been a sterling, reputable, very, very good operation ever since. And so
it has been fun, and it's been fun talking with you today. We'll have to do it again soon.
I'd love it. Thanks so much, Fred.
Thanks, Delano. That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Yes, NPR. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition, 5 to 9. Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2. And All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News, always online at krwg.org. And we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.